CNN's Donnie O'Sullivan got in the cage with former UFC star turned podcaster Jake Shields to explore the manosphere and why exactly it's so popular.
They speak liberal, they have liberal friends, and then they go online and they are a white supremacist.
This is Vera Papasova. She spent the last year dating far-right men in New York City for a story for Cosmopolitan magazine.
They're the most insecure men I've ever sat down with. It was really difficult to have some of these dates because they were so insecure, because they don't really know who they are and they don't know how to figure that out.
She said the men she dated got all their news and information from the so-called manosphere.
They did not listen to anything else. They're only listening to independent media, and they're only listening to men talking to men.
The manosphere is made up of macho podcasters and influencers.
There's no such thing as an independent female.
Most women have zero concept of like money.
Females don't have independent thought.
It's a space where UFC fighters are among those who reign supreme.
They love the UFC guys. They love the MMA guys because those guys do what they can. They're modern gladiators. They're badass.
Badass like Jake Shields, a former UFC star turned podcaster.
All right. Now I'm starting to feel nervous. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, of course.
Who I met at an MMA gym in Las Vegas.
Like all great MMA pros. I've never hit anyone in my life.
I'm not punching back, hit me. No, I sit right here. KO.
This is CNN. Do you miss being full-time pro, like in terms of?
You know, of course I miss it. To go from professional athlete, which is the highest of highs, to retirement.
And I guess
the podcast has helped. You could fall into depression if you just go from the most amazing career where you're famous and spotlights to all of a sudden you're a nobody.
Sure.
Like other podcasters in the manosphere, Jake regularly hosts controversial guests.
And I named the podcast Fighting Back. I feel like we have to fight back what we're told we're allowed to do. I just don't like to be told you're not allowed to talk to this person. Like, why can't I talk to him? I'm not saying I agree with his ideology, but I should hear what he has to say.
He's hosted the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Today I have a very, very special guest, Dr. David Duke. I knew you're controversial, but I had no idea how controversial.
And Thomas Russo, the leader of the white supremacist group Patriot Front.
Let's go where we disagree a little bit.
Yes, sure.
Let's hit race, because you're a white-only group?
So the organization only allows people of American ethnicity, and all Americans, I believe, come from Europe, so they're white.
The true heirs of the American spirit fight on!
Yeah, no, I understand and talk to these guys, but I've also not brought anyone hateful. If I do, I'm going to be really on top of them.
But so you saying that you haven't brought someone hateful on, right? People will say, well, you brought on a Grand Wizard of the KKK, you brought on Patriot Front.
Yeah.
They're hateful.
No, I think those are excellent questions, but if people go and watch the actual interviews, I think they would be like, oh, this guy's not near as hateful as if I expect it.
But Vera says hate isn't what the men she dated were really looking for.
One of these guys brought me to a political meeting.
And did they talk about politics?
Barely. They talked about, it was a bunch of men complaining about girlfriends and wives, regurgitating Andrew Tate type of advice about how to train your girlfriend, how to train your wife to be submissive. And so this group was supposed to be a political group, but they're talking about relationship problems. And the fact that that's what most of the time was spent on, you don't need to be a neo-Nazi. You need therapy.
The appeal of Jake's podcast speaks to a need among young men in this country that Vera says can't be ignored.
You have to incentivize someone to want to be better. You can't just say, let's make men better. The thing about these guys is their biggest support system is online, but that also is very isolating, and isolation is what breeds hatred.
Groups like Patriot Front offer community, but community based on racism and hate.
People have to really think about, do you have the capacity to talk to people that you don't agree with? Because that one nice conversation you might have might change someone's day enough to not have to seek out help in an online support group, which is actually a bunch of white supremacists using political beliefs as an excuse for how they feel.
Donnie O'Sullivan is here with us now. Donnie, I'm so glad you've done this special. There's so much intrigue around this issue of the manosphere. And in fact, Trump is going to the UFC tonight. How big of a role does the sport play in the manosphere?
Hey, Isabel. Yeah, and look, we should point out at the start here, there's tons of guys who are fans, and some women as well, who are fans of the UFC. I have many friends who are fans of the UFC. It certainly does not mean, you know, that if you are a fan of the UFC, you are falling sort of down this rabbit hole of hate and white supremacy and everything else. But what we are seeing is that there is this sort of, there is this crossover. The UFC is playing a greater and bigger role, really, in American life. Joe Rogan, who's the world's biggest podcaster, is a UFC commentator. Dana White, who is the founder of the UFC, is a prominent Trump supporter and was recently appointed to the board of Meta by Mark Zuckerberg himself, another big MMA and UFC fan. And actually fighting tonight in Miami, Trump is going to the event. We're not sure if he'll be there for the earlier fights, but fighting tonight in Miami at the UFC event is a fighter by the name of Bryce Mitchell, who recently set up a podcast of his own, and on his debut episode a few months ago, he said that Hitler was a quote-unquote good guy or a great guy. Dana White, the head of the UFC, was quick to condemn that, but you know, you can just kind of see there where folks who might be coming into this sport for one reason are a fan of fighting, and then they're getting exposed to views like Bryce Mitchell's.